Princess Lyra walked along the main corridor of the Aravel research vessel with slow and steady steps. She carried herself with grace, as she always did, and her long silver robes moved softly around her legs. Her mind was busy with the mission ahead, and she barely paid attention to the group of humans who had joined her crew for this journey. The humans were there to assist, observe, and offer support where needed. Still, most of them stayed quiet, watching the alien ship with curious eyes. Among them was a young human man named Evan Brooks. He stood at the back of the group, holding a small tool pack and keeping his gaze lowered. His clothes were simple, and nothing about him stood out. He did not speak unless someone spoke to him first, and even then, he answered only with a few words. Because of this, most people assumed he was just an apprentice technician sent along for learning. Lyra made the same assumption without a second thought. She gave a short nod to the human team, acknowledging their presence, then continued to lead them through the corridor. Evan walked silently behind the others, observing everything around him. He watched how the Aravel consoles flickered with blue holograms, how the air carried a faint, sweet smell from the oxygen recyclers, and how the ship hummed with a soft and steady rhythm. He did not miss a single detail, but he also did not draw attention. Lyra's chief advisor, a tall Aravel named Rhinel, walked beside her. He explained the purpose of the mission to the humans. They were headed toward an uncharted moon in a quiet star system, a moon that had never been explored by Aravel scientists. The scans showed strange mineral patterns across the surface. There were also rumors about dangerous wildlife, but Lyra dismissed those. She had seen many worlds, and she felt confident this one would not be any different. Evan listened carefully to Rhinel's words. He did not speak, but a small crease appeared on his forehead. The strange mineral patterns bothered him. They did not match normal geological behavior. He wanted to ask a question, but he decided it was better to stay quiet. He knew how aliens often treated humans on mixed missions. Some respected them, but many still saw them as newcomers to galactic exploration. He did not want to interrupt the princess or sound like he doubted her plan. When the group reached the observation deck, Lyra waved a hand toward the large window that looked out at the moon below. The humans stepped forward to look at its gray surface, where deep canyons streaked across like claw marks. Some of them whispered to each other in excitement. Lyra turned slightly toward the group. Her voice was calm and confident. She said that the mission would be simple. They would land, collect samples, take scans, and return to orbit. She expected no problems. Her guards would accompany them, and the ship's sensors would monitor every step. Most of the humans nodded in agreement. But Evan stared at the moon with a quiet intensity. Something about the shape of the canyon lines bothered him. He had seen patterns like this before, though not in rocks. They looked more like movement trails left by large predators on heavy gravity worlds. He remembered the countless training exercises his old unit had put him through. They had studied predator movement, feeding grounds, and territorial marks, and the moon below looked too similar to be coincidence. But he still said nothing. One of the humans, a woman named Julia, looked at Evan with a puzzled expression. She asked in a low voice why he kept staring so hard. Evan gave a small shrug and said he was only thinking. She waited for him to explain more, but he fell silent again. Julia shook her head gently. She liked Evan well enough, but she thought he was strange. He never offered details about himself. He never talked about his past, and sometimes he looked at things with a sharpness that did not match the quiet way he behaved. When Lyra finished giving instructions, the human team was dismissed to prepare for the landing. Lyra stayed behind with Rhinel to go over a few last-minute plans. Evan walked out of the deck in silence. As he moved through the hallway, he kept turning the same thought over in his mind. Something on that moon was alive. Something big. Something dangerous. He felt it in the same deep place inside him that had warned him during his old missions. That inner instinct had saved him many times before, and he had learned to trust it. But Lyra had brushed off the danger, and he was supposed to be only an apprentice. No one would listen to him if he raised a concern without proof. And he had no proof yet, only a feeling. Only a memory of claw marks on death worlds, where no normal team would ever dare to land. The next day, The landing team gathered at the shuttle bay. Lyra walked in with 3 of her royal guards behind her. They carried long energy staffs, and their armor shined faintly under the bay lights. Lyra gave the humans a bright and polite smile. She liked to show herself as approachable, especially to newer species like humans. Evan stood near the back again, holding his pack. He had checked his tools 3 times, even though he did not need to. He knew he was ready for anything, but he also knew the others were not. He scanned each member of the team. Most were relaxed. They expected a quiet day of research. Evan wished he shared their confidence, but he could not shake the tension in his chest. Lyra stepped into the shuttle first. Her guards followed. The humans boarded next, and Evan took a seat near the row closest to the rear door. He wanted to be the last one off the shuttle once they landed. That would give him time to scan the terrain with his eyes before the others stepped out. As the shuttle lifted, Lyra glanced back at the humans. She noticed Evan for the first time that day. He sat still, but his eyes were sharp, watching the landscape below as they descended. There was something unusual about the depth of his focus. She found herself watching him for a moment longer than she intended. She whispered to Rhinell, asking if the quiet human boy was indeed just an apprentice. Rhinell nodded confidently. He had looked at the human files himself. Evan was listed as a junior technician with general field training, nothing more. Lyra accepted the explanation and turned her eyes back to the window. The shuttle touched down in a wide canyon. Dust lifted around the landing legs, and the air shimmered faintly under the pale sunlight. When the door opened, a strange silence greeted them. No wind, no rustling of small creatures, no distant echo, only quiet. The guards stepped out first, scanning the area. Then Lyra followed. The humans came next, eager to look around. Evan was the last one to step onto the rocky ground. The moment his boots touched the surface, he knelt down and pressed his fingers to the soil. It was cold, dry, and heavy. He lifted a small amount and let it fall through his fingers. It dropped faster than he expected. Strong gravity. He looked around the canyon walls, studying the deep grooves carved into the stone. They were smooth in some places and freshly broken in others. They were not the work of water, not the work of wind. They were the work of claws, or teeth, or something far worse. His body felt tight with warning. Lyra walked ahead with her guards. She studied the walls with interest, admiring the strange patterns. She did not see danger in them. She saw only mystery and science. She asked the humans to begin collecting samples near the canyon base. Evan stayed near the back of the group, but he could not hold back his instinct anymore. He stepped closer to Julia and whispered that they should be careful. She asked him why, and he said the marks on the canyon looked fresh, too fresh. Julia frowned but said nothing. She did not know enough about alien wildlife to judge. When Lyra came near, Julia tried to mention what Evan had said, but Evan quickly shook his head and said it was nothing. Lyra raised an eyebrow at the exchange. She asked Evan if he had noticed anything unusual. He hesitated. He wanted to speak. He wanted to tell her to go back to the ship. He wanted to say that the soil, the grooves, the silence, all of it pointed to something dangerous, but he only said, in a low voice, that the ground looked heavy and the canyon walls were interesting. Lyra accepted the vague answer and moved on, thinking he was simply shy or unsure of himself. She did not know that Evan rarely spoke about danger unless he was certain. And right now, he was almost certain. But almost was not enough. He needed proof. The team spread out and began collecting samples. Scanners hummed. Dust shifted under their boots. But the silence stayed the same. No birds. No insects. No distant rumble. And silence like that only existed in places where predators ruled. Evan slowly stepped away from the group, pretending to examine a rock formation. His eyes moved across the canyon like a hunter's. He saw broken stone near the far wall. He saw a path of crushed soil. He saw a long, thin line that looked like a tail drag. He stopped breathing for a moment. This was not just one creature. It was a group. He stood up straight, feeling his heart pound harder. He needed to warn them. But before he could speak, a soft tremor passed through the ground. Then another. And another. Evan turned sharply toward the canyon entrance, and that was when he saw the shadows moving far in the distance. Big shadows. Fast shadows. The kind of movement he recognized from the deepest and deadliest wild zones on human death worlds. His body went still. His instincts screamed. Something was coming, and the others had no idea. The tremor under Evan's feet grew stronger, just enough for him to feel it through the bottom of his boots. It was light, almost gentle, but he knew better than to take it lightly. Tremors like that came only when something large moved across heavy ground. He slowly lifted his head and scanned the canyon again. The others continued their work, unaware of the danger. Princess Lyra stood near a large rock formation, watching her guards take readings. She looked perfectly calm, as if she were enjoying the quietness of the place. She believed her guards and scanners were enough to warn her of anything, but the scanners were made to track normal wildlife, not creatures that lived in deep and harsh worlds. Not creatures that knew how to move silently. Not creatures like the ones Evan feared were coming closer. Evan walked toward Lyra with slow, steady steps. He did not want to cause panic until he was sure. But every instinct in him was pushing him forward. He felt the same cold warning he had felt years ago, back when his old unit had walked straight into a nest of silent hunters on a high-gravity world. They had survived only because he had sensed danger before the creatures attacked. He had trusted that instinct then, and he needed to trust it now. Julia noticed Evan moving with purpose and called out to him softly, asking what was wrong. Evan shook his head slightly and kept going. He did not want to scare her or the others, not yet, not until he spoke to Lyra. He reached the princess and stopped a few steps away. Lyra turned and looked at him, surprised that the quiet human had approached her without being asked. Her guards watched him too, hands tightening on their staffs. Lyra asked him if he needed something. Evan took a slow breath. His voice was calm but firm as he said that they might not be alone in the canyon. Lyra blinked, not understanding at first. She asked what he meant. Evan explained that the marks on the walls were fresh, and the tremors in the ground suggested movement. Big movement. Rhinell, the advisor, stepped closer and frowned. He asked if Evan was sure. Evan answered honestly. He said he was not fully sure, but he had seen patterns like these on dangerous worlds, and creatures that lived in such places were never small. Lyra hesitated. She trusted her scanners. She trusted her guards. A young human apprentice did not seem like the type to warn her about threats she, a princess with years of training, had missed. But something in Evan's eyes made her pause. He was not guessing. He was not trying to get attention. He looked like someone who had seen things he did not want others to see. Before Lyra could ask further questions, another tremor rolled through the canyon, stronger than the previous ones. This time everyone felt it. The guards straightened, looking around. Julia stopped her sample work, her face tightening with worry. Even the scanners let out soft beeps of confusion, picking up unclear signals. Evan turned his head slowly toward the canyon entrance. His breath grew colder. He saw shadows again. Larger now. Closer. Moving with clear purpose. He whispered that something was coming. Lyra stepped forward to look, but she saw only shifting shapes in the distance. Her guards raised their weapons. Rhinell shouted for everyone to gather near the shuttle, but Evan knew it was too late for that. The creatures were already inside the canyon. Escaping in the shuttle would take time they did not have. He looked at Lyra and spoke in a tone that left no room for question. He told her not to run. Running would trigger the hunt. Then the first creature stepped out of the shadows. It was enormous, its thick legs shaking the ground with every step. Its skin was dark, gray, like rough stone, and long bone plates ran down its back. Its head was large and narrow, with glowing yellow eyes that locked on the team. Its teeth were long, sharp, and curved, made for crushing and tearing. When it opened its jaw, a deep rumble rolled across the canyon floor. Lyra froze. She had never seen anything like it. One of her guards shouted for the others to fall back. But before anyone could move, 2 more creatures appeared behind the first. Then a fourth, then a fifth, a whole pack. Rhinell whispered the name of the species. Voidclaws. Apex predators known across the sector. But they were not supposed to be on this moon. They belonged to wild planets with deadly conditions. Worlds even mercenaries avoided. But here they were, standing right in front of them. The guards panicked. One stepped back too quickly, and his armor scraped against a sharp rock. The sound echoed like a shout in the silence. The Voidclaw's eyes snapped toward him. They leaned forward, their tails lifting off the ground. Evan stepped in front of Lyra without thinking. The movement was natural to him, something he had done many times before for members of his old unit. He kept his body relaxed, his hands open at his sides. He stared straight at the lead Voidclaw, not blinking. Lyra's mouth opened slightly as she watched him put himself between her and the creatures. Her guards had stepped back, forming a loose circle behind her. But Evan stood alone. The Voidclaw pack began to spread out, forming a large half-circle around the group. Their heavy claws scraped against the stone. Their low growls grew louder. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, preparing to fight. Evan whispered sharply not to attack. If they attacked, the creatures would charge, and the whole team would die in seconds. Lyra asked him what they should do then. Evan did not answer with words. He simply stepped farther forward, toward the Voidclaws, keeping his hands down and open. Julia cried out softly, begging him to come back. Rhinell ordered him to stop, but Evan kept moving. The pack froze, watching him with quick, tense eyes. The lead Voidclaw lowered its head and sniffed the air. Evan stared back calmly. His heart was beating fast, but he kept his breath slow and steady. He had been trained for moments like this. His old unit had faced creatures just as dangerous, some even worse. He took another step forward. The lead Voidclaw growled, then suddenly stopped. Its eyes narrowed. It stepped back. The other creatures began to shift uneasily, their tails twitching. They were not retreating yet, but they were uncertain. Something about Evan made them reconsider. Lyra watched with disbelief as the giant beasts moved away from him. She had expected them to attack him first. Instead, they acted like they recognized him as something dangerous, something they should respect or avoid. Evan slowly raised one hand, palm out, telling the pack to stay back without saying a word. His posture was steady, grounded, confident in a quiet and controlled way. The pack responded with soft, guttural sounds that almost sounded like nervous cheering. Lyra whispered to Rhinell, asking what was happening. Rhinell had no answer. He had never seen Voidclaws behave like this. They feared nothing. They attacked everything. But here they were, stepping back from a single human who looked like an apprentice. One of the guards finally spoke in a shaking voice. He asked Evan how he was doing this. Evan kept his eyes forward and said the creatures were unsure. They sensed confidence, strength, and calm. On death worlds, predators always judged their prey by posture. If someone stood like a hunter, predators hesitated. If someone showed fear, they attacked. Lyra stared at Evan with wide eyes. He did not look like a quiet technician anymore. He looked like someone who had walked through danger many times before. The tremors grew lighter as the Voidclaws slowly backed away. Step by step. The pack watched Evan until they reached the canyon entrance again. Then they turned and slipped into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Only when the last creature was gone did Evan lower his hand and step back. Silence filled the canyon again. Lyra took a deep breath she had not realized she was holding. Her guards were trembling. Julia wiped tears from her eyes. Rhinell stared at Evan like he was looking at a stranger. Lyra stepped toward him and asked him softly how he knew what to do. Evan hesitated. He looked down at his hands, unsure if he should explain. But Lyra waited, watching him with new eyes. After a moment, Evan spoke. He said he had once served in a human deep wild operations unit, a group trained to survive on death worlds and deal with the creatures that lived there. He had learned how predators thought, how they moved, and how to stop them without fighting. Lyra felt her stomach twist in shock. She asked him why he had not told anyone. Evan said quietly that most people did not want to hear stories from humans who came from dangerous places, and most saw him as an apprentice anyway. He did not mind staying quiet, but Lyra minded. She thought back to every moment she had ignored him, every time she had assumed he was just another junior worker. Now she realized how wrong she had been. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. She thanked him for saving her life. Evan nodded once, then looked back at the canyon entrance. He told her gently that the pack would return soon. Void Claws always checked their territory twice. Lyra's eyes widened. She asked if they should leave. Evan nodded firmly. Yes. They needed to go now. Rhynel shouted for everyone to return to the shuttle. The team moved fast, packing equipment in seconds. The guards stayed close to Lyra, though they kept glancing at Evan with a mix of fear and respect. Evan was the last to enter the shuttle again. He stood by the door until everyone else was seated, watching the canyon like a guardian who refused to look away. When he finally stepped inside, the door closed behind him. The shuttle rose from the ground and lifted into the sky, leaving the quiet canyon behind. But Princess Lyra did not stop watching Evan. Not even for a moment. Because now, she knew he was not who she thought he was. And now she wanted to know who he really was. The shuttle rose higher into the sky, and the canyon faded behind them. Everyone sat quiet inside, breathing hard, still trying to understand what they had seen. The guards held their weapons close, as if expecting the Void Claws to leap after them. Julia looked pale, her hands shaking slightly. Rhynel kept checking the scanners even though they were already far from the ground. Princess Lyra, however, did not take her eyes off Evan. He sat near the rear door again, calm but watchful. His shoulders were relaxed, but his eyes were sharp and alert. It was clear he was still in survival mode. He watched the terrain through the window as if studying every shadow and every movement. When the shuttle finally broke through the clouds and reached open space, the tension inside began to fade. The guards lowered their weapons. Julia let out a long breath of relief. Rhynel leaned back in his seat, rubbing his forehead. Only Evan stayed still, quiet as always, though a tiny bit of the heaviness in his expression softened. Lyra stood slowly and walked toward him. Her guards moved as if to follow, but she raised a hand, telling them to stay back. She wanted to speak to Evan alone. She stopped in front of him and asked if she could sit beside him. Evan nodded politely, and she took the seat next to him. For a few seconds she said nothing. She simply watched him, unsure where to begin. She had thought she knew humans well. She had worked with many before. She had seen them as clever, curious, and strong, but still fairly new to the deeper parts of the galaxy. She had never imagined one could stand in front of Void Claws and make them back away. She finally asked him a gentle question. She wanted to know how long he had been in the deep wild unit he mentioned. Evan hesitated, then answered that he had joined when he was very young. He said the training was harsh and the missions were harder. He explained that they were sent to worlds so dangerous that most species refused to explore them. Lyra listened closely, her eyes widening at every detail. She asked why he left a unit like that. Evan looked down at his hands. Thinking for a moment, he said he had seen too much danger, too much loss, and he wanted a quieter life. He wanted to help instead of fight. So he joined a general tech program where no one knew his past. He hoped he could live a simple life there. Lyra felt a strange ache in her chest. She wondered how many people had walked past him, never knowing what he carried, never asking who he really was. She realized she had been one of them. She had seen a quiet human and assumed he was inexperienced. She felt embarrassed and guilty. She told him softly that she had misjudged him. Evan shook his head, saying it was normal. He said he kept his past hidden on purpose. He did not like to talk about it. He said it was easier when people did not expect too much from him. But Lyra did expect something now. She expected honesty. She expected strength. And she expected to understand him. When the shuttle landed back on the research vessel, the crew hurried out to check on the landing team. Julia told them everything, her voice shaking with emotion. The guards explained how the void claws had surrounded them. Reinl said they would need to report the discovery of the species on this moon. It was an important scientific finding, but also a dangerous one. But the crew kept asking the same question over and over. How did the creatures back away? How did Evan stop them? Julia tried to explain what she saw, but even she had trouble believing it. The guards stayed quiet, still shaken. Evan walked out last, keeping close to the wall, hoping to avoid attention. But Lyra called him forward. She told the crew that Evan had saved all their lives, every single one of them. The crew stared at him with wide eyes. Some looked confused, some looked afraid, some looked amazed. Evan lowered his head, uncomfortable with all the attention. He did not want to be treated like a hero. He only wanted them to be safe. Lyra then ordered her guards and Reinl to give her a moment alone with Evan. They nodded and stepped away. She led Evan down a quiet hallway where no one else followed. When they reached a small observation room, she stopped and turned to look at him fully. She told him she wanted him to be her advisor for all ground missions. Evan blinked in surprise. He said he was only a technician. Lyra said she no longer believed that. She said she saw him face the void claws with the calm of a leader, not a trainee. She said she wanted someone beside her who understood danger better than anyone else. Evan did not answer right away. He stood near the large window, staring out at the stars. His mind was full of old memories, both good and painful. He remembered his old team, his old missions, the worlds they survived, and the ones they almost did not. He remembered wanting to leave that life behind. Lyra stepped closer to him. She did not order him. She simply asked. She told him she trusted him. She said she wanted him near, because she felt safer when he was there. He turned his head slightly, surprised by her honesty. He asked her why she trusted him now, when she had barely looked at him before today. Lyra said she had made a mistake, and she was trying to fix it. She said she did not want to judge him by silence but by action. And his actions had shown more strength and wisdom than anyone else on the mission. Evan thought for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. He agreed to be her advisor, but only if he could still help with the technical work. He said he wanted to stay useful in more than one way. Lyra smiled, relieved, and agreed. That evening, the atmosphere on the ship changed. Some crew members approached Evan with respect. Others kept their distance, unsure what to say. But all of them treated him differently now. He could feel the shift in their eyes. He was no longer invisible. Lyra invited him to join her for a private meal in her quarters. It was not formal. It was not fancy. She simply wanted to talk with him and understand him better. Evan sat across from her at a small table. The food was warm, and the room smelled like soft flowers from her home planet. She asked him many questions, but gently, never pushing. She asked what drew him to quiet work, why he chose not to speak about his past, what he hoped to find in a calmer life. Evan answered honestly, though sometimes slowly. He said he did not like being seen as dangerous. He said he wanted peace. He said he liked fixing things that were broken. Lyra listened to every word. She told him he was more than dangerous. He was brave. She told him he was not only strong in body, but also strong in mind. And she told him she was grateful he had chosen to join her mission. Evan felt something warm in his chest. He was not used to praise. But Lyra's voice was gentle, and her words felt sincere. He found himself smiling softly, something he rarely did. When the meal ended, Lyra walked him to the door. Before he left, she said she wanted him to stand beside her during the mission briefing the next day. Evan hesitated but agreed. He walked out with a calm expression. But inside, he felt a quiet shift in himself. Someone had finally seen him not as a silent worker, but as a person. The next day, during the briefing, Lyra introduced Evan as her new advisor. The crew accepted it without question. They had seen enough to understand. Later, Lyra asked him to join her in reviewing the scans from the moon. They sat side by side, studying the strange patterns in the stone. Evan explained that the void claws were territorial, and that the canyon was likely their hunting ground. Lyra listened carefully, taking notes. It was the first time she had ever taken notes from a human. As they worked, she glanced at him from time to time. She found herself watching his steady hands, the calm way he thought, the careful way he spoke. There was something comforting about him, something she had not expected. Evan noticed her looking and asked if something was wrong. Lyra shook her head and said she was only thinking. She said she had learned something important from him. She said humans were far more complex than she had believed. He gave her a small smile and said that aliens often misunderstood humans. They were quiet at first, but strong when needed. They were friendly, but fierce when danger appeared. They were soft, but not weak, Lyra agreed. She had seen it with her own eyes. As the ship moved through space, the stars glowing outside, Lyra felt a new certainty forming inside her. Evan was not a simple apprentice. He was not someone to ignore or overlook. He was someone she could trust, someone she wanted by her side. And as Evan walked beside her through the long corridors of the ship, he felt something new too. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The Void Claws had stepped back from him, but the princess had stepped closer, and that changed everything.